What is up, everybody? Happy Saturday. Welcome into an all-new episode of the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. You can find the podcast at Pack a Day Podcast. As always, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate all the support. We've got a lot to get into today, specifically with two defensive tackles that I think are very intriguing options for Green Bay. If you're looking for a couple pass rushers on the interior, well, I've got a couple players that we're going to discuss today, and maybe one or two of them catch your fancy. We will take a look at them in just a moment. Before we get there, I need to start off with a sincere apology. I am not perfect. I make mistakes from time to time, and I want to apologize. Yesterday, we were going over some of the greatest wide receivers of all time. I talked about Jerry Rice, talked about Randy Moss, and I did not bring up Don Hutson. And that is a big error on my part. Now, to my defense, when I was thinking of this out loud, all right, I didn't have like a planned talking about the best receivers all time. When I was thinking about it out loud, I was thinking of modern wide receivers in my mind. So Jerry Rice, Randy Moss, to me, the two greatest wide receivers of my lifetime that I've seen played. We were talking, of course, about Sterling Sharp making the Hall of Fame, the receivers that he went against, and then I went kind of from there and forward, but failed to look backwards. And yes, when I started bringing up the conversation about all-time great wide receivers, Don Hutson, very, very much deserving of that conversation. So was not meant to not put him on that list or in that category. Very much deserving of that recognition and in that conversation. I think it's, these are Randy Moss and Jerry Rice you can compare and contrast to some extent. Like Don Hutson is a completely different era of football altogether. But I think how you have to almost compare eras is how dominant were they in comparison to the rest of their era. And to me, Don Hutson was more dominant than any other wide receiver in his era, more than Rice was dominant over Sterling Sharp or Michael Irvin or whoever else you want to go over, and more than Randy Moss was dominant over his era. So if you want to judge it that way, you could certainly make an argument for Don Hutson. Regardless, Hutson, just an unbelievable career. But my apologies for the omission yesterday. I will not make that mistake again. And just know that it was not for the lack of knowing of Hutson or putting him in that conversation. It was more of just thinking of Rice to current. But I digress. My bad. Won't happen again. Jordan Love was on Radio Row. And the great news is that there's really nothing to talk about. There's no controversial statements, although I guess a couple tried by saying that if, because Love joked and said, knowing the Green Bay Packers are going to take a, defensive player in the first round. And then apparently that somehow got compared to Aaron Rodgers and what Aaron Rodgers would have been criticized if he said it. Oy vey. I don't know even what to do with that. It's much ado about nothing. Jordan was great. He handled all of the talking points the way that he should have. Asked about, would you want a number one wide receiver? He knew kind of the answers to the test ahead of time, I'm sure, but he did a great job answering it, just saying, I love my guys. I want to go to battle with those. But if we've already got a great wide receiver room, if you add another great wide receiver, it only gets better. Very well done. Bravo, Jordan Love. No controversy, no issues. And just seemed like very much like Josh Jacobs. He was just having fun out there, which you love to see. And I think that's a great realm for those players to kind of get out there. Usually, have something that they're promoting or whatever, but still great just to see him, happy, seemed energetic, seemed healthy, which is what you want to see from your QB1. He did kind of talk a little bit about the injuries that he suffered through the course of the season, how it affected him. I love the fact that he didn't make any excuses for it. Said nobody's 100%. You got to continue to play through it. Talked about being a competitor. I loved it. Everything I heard from Jordan, I loved. No notes, just a really nice job hitting all the talking points and making sure that you didn't have any put your foot in your mouth moments. And he handled it like a pro's pro, as you would absolutely have expected him to do throughout the entirety of the day. That brings us to our main topic for the day, and that is two defensive tackles that are of some interest, I think, for Green Bay going into this free agency period. And I think before we can get into either of them, we kind of need to talk about defensive tackle. We talked about a little bit when we went over Milton Williams in the Milton Williams and Josh Sweat episode. If you haven't checked that out yet, make sure to do so. But Green Bay clearly has a need, number one, just for pass rush, right? So regardless of where that pass rush is coming from, whether it's on the interior or whether it's at defensive end, it kind of doesn't matter. They just need to add juice to their pass rush in some capacity. It can be at either of those spots. The second thing is they probably do need some legitimate depth competition and some players down the road at the defensive tackle spot. Right now, you've got Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Carl Brooks, and Colby Wooden under contract. TJ Slayton's a free agent. You also have Nesta Jade Silvera, James Esther, Keith Randolph, and Leonard Payne as other defensive tackles on the roster. You can just scooch those to the side for the moment because they're not at the table of players that we need to discuss at this moment. If one of them steps up and gets to the adult table, awesome. That's awesome. That's amazing. But for now, they're over there and you don't put any stock into any of them until they actually prove themselves in a training camp, in a preseason, and actually get on the field, et cetera, et cetera. So those four you can put to the side. And right now you look at it as Clark, Wyatt, Brooks, and Wooden. All four of which, at least as of now, are not going anywhere. I do think Colby Wooden probably gets to the world where he's going to have to earn his spot. I don't think it's just going to get handed to him as a former fourth round pick anymore. If he wants to, actually be on the 53, I don't think this is just going to be by default. And I would expect some competition there for his job. But Brooks, Wyatt, Clark, and probably Wooden are all going to be on this team in some capacity, but they still have some openings there. And furthermore, as I mentioned, TJ Slayton, a free agent. Kenny Clark, there's a real good chance that this is his last year in Green Bay. The contract is a bit more get-outable in 2026. So that's a possibility. Devontae Wyatt, they're going to have to make that determination on the fifth-year option or extension or some sort of compromise in between. If they don't do that, he's a free agent next year. And then, like I said, Colby Wooden's to the point where he's got to earn it. And it's not like Carl Brooks is this he didn't take this big step in year two. He's not this dominant player. He's a nice player. He's going to be on the team. And I still think there's a really talented player there overall, but he's going to have to sort of earn his way continuously as well. So you kind of have some needs, not just now, but certainly looking ahead to 2026 and beyond. There's some need for some long-term depth and value and just talent at that position. So there's a reason why Green Bay will be looking for defensive tackles, pass rushers, etc., because there's a legitimate need for those. So that brings us to two players today that I want to look at. And I promise you this was not done due to crazy names with a lot of consonants and vowels in them, but they just kind of matched up to make sense. One for the Cowboys, one for the Lions, two talented players that have had 4 years in the league. They're unrestricted free agents. They were drafted in the same class, both out of the Pac-10 or Pac-12 or whatever, the Pac-30, whatever it is now. It's just I think they're really fun players to kind of look at the same time. So that's why we're doing it today. The first is Osa Odighizuwa. So just if you're not familiar with the name, Osa Odighizuwa, and then Levi Onwuzurike. Levi Onwuzurike. Those are your two players that we're going to be discussing today. Osa Odighizuwa is the 30th ranked PFF free agent. Levi Onwuzurike is the 40th ranked PFF free agent. The contracts for Osa Odighizuwa, they're projecting 4 years, $21.25 million average, $42.5 million guaranteed, and a $85 million total contract for Osa Odighizuwa. Spotrac is expecting 3 years, $21 million average, $62.97 million. So $63 million basically in total. That's what they're expecting. For Levi Onwuzurike, PFF is expecting 2 years, $8.25 million per year, $10 million guaranteed, $16.5 million total. Spotrac is at 2 years, $4.5 million per year, $9 million total. So you're potentially looking at, if these numbers would come out this way, Odighizuwa potentially getting 4 years, $85 million, and Onwuzurike getting 2 years, $9 million, depending on what numbers you're looking at, right? A massive difference, a quite frankly, unbelievable difference. Now, I don't think the difference is going to be that great. I do think Odighizuwa probably in that range. I think it's going to be a little bit less, but I could be wrong on that. And I definitely think Onwuzurike is going to be a little bit more. I would expect him to be more in that 10 to 12 million range, but maybe I'm a little bit high on that too. I'll just say now, if that is the gap between the two, it is a stunning and startling gap between the two. Because as you'll learn in just a moment, I did not think that there was the gap there in player. In fact, spoiler alert, when I went through and watched the tape, I kind of liked Onwuzurike just a little bit more. There's a reason Odighizuwa, and this is going to probably get confusing to some extent, so let me just try to clarify it as much as possible. Odighizuwa is from Dallas. Odighi from Dallas. Onwuzurike is the Lion. All right? Odighizuwa, Dallas. Onwuzurike is the Lion. Just to try to make it so Odighi, Dallas. Just think of it that way. Stupid, but now you probably won't forget it. That's where we're at from a potential contract standpoint. But spoiler alert, I liked actually Onwuzurike, the one that's supposed to go for like 70 million less potentially. I kind of like this tape a little bit more. Interestingly enough, despite him being the 40th ranked player on PFF's free agent chart and Odighizuwa being 30th, they actually had a higher PFF grade on Onwuzurike as well. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And I would never, ever have expected that there would have been that potential gap in salaries between the two just at watching their tape. I was legitimately like floored. Now we'll see. We'll see what the NFL thinks. Maybe that gap is a lot thinner, or maybe it is Odighizuwa by a landslide. It's going to be I'm very interested to see, regardless of what team they end up with, just to see what the difference in contracts is between the two. Odighizuwa, the Cowboy, 859 snaps this past year, 68.1 PFF grade, 50.8 run defense, remember 60s average, 47.0 tackling grade, 78.5 pass rush grade. They gave him credit for 60 pressures this past year. 7 sacks, 14 hits, and 39 hurries made up those 60 pressures. He turns 27 in August. He's 6'2", 280, had a 7.64 relative athletic score coming out of college. He was the 75th overall pick in 2021. His stat line per like the NFL statistics are 47 tackles, 5 tackles for loss, only 4.5 sacks, not 7. PFF graded him at 7 sacks. The NFL has him at 4.5 sacks and 1 forced fumble. So that's Odighizuwa. Onwuzurike will turn 27 in March, 6'3", 304, 8.73 relative athletic score coming out of college. He was the 41st overall pick in 2021. So taking 34 spots ahead of Odighizuwa. This past year, he played 697 snaps with a 70.2 PFF grade, 66.5 run defense grade, 48.7 tackling grade, and a 66.2 pass rush grade. He had 47 pressures, 3 sacks, 14 hits, and 30 hurries. So if you're combining the pressures, 60 for Osa, 47 for Levi, 7 sacks for Osa, 3 for Levi, 14 hits for both, 39 hurries for Osa, 30 for Levi. So when it comes to pressure, pass rush, Osa outperformed Levi at least this past season. From a stat line per NFL, Onwuzurike had 28 tackles this past year, 1 tackle for loss, 1.5 sacks, and 1 forced fumble. That's the basic scouting report, right? Age, relative athletic score, where they were drafted, stats, all of that stuff. Now let's actually get into the tape. We're going to start with Osa Odighizuwa from Dallas first. The positives for Osa: very strong hands, swipes opposing linemen hands away with ease. He has really quick, very physical hands, and he will get to the side, and we're going to go over this, I guess, in a little bit, but I'll just touch base on it now. He gets out of his stance quick, has really good lateral agility. He does that quick sidestep, and as the offensive lineman is adjusting, right? So offensive lineman comes up, gets ready to engage with the defensive tackle, and we talked about this with Milton Williams as well, where Milton Williams would do that quick step and then explode up. That was Milton Williams. With Odighizuwa, he gets up, gets into that gap next to him as the offensive lineman gets up to go to him, and then makes that adjustment to get his hands over because, all right, he just moved a gap over. I got my hands over. As he's making that adjustment, the center or the guard to get his hands over, he takes those hands and swipes them away and kind of forces the offensive lineman off balance. And then as he's basically doing this, what he's doing is he's getting even with the offensive lineman as he's getting to the quarterback. And then it's almost like a receiver in a corner, where we talk about a receiver stacking a corner to make it so that the corner can't get past him. He's got him even, and then he's almost like getting out in front of him, stacking that offensive lineman, and then getting to the quarterback. It's a really good move. It's really quick, and it utilizes some of his best skills. Quickness out of his stance, lateral agility, strong hands to swipe the hands away, and then stacking basically the offensive lineman and getting to the quarterback. It's a really, really good move. But he shows off the hands, the lateral agility, the quick first step. All of it is there for Osa Odighizuwa. Does show the ability to win quick. Doesn't slow up on plays, keeps attacking. So even if he gets knocked down or whatever the case may be, he gets back up, he keeps attacking. Even if he's stymied at first, he keeps working. Those are things that you love to see. It's not consistent, but he does show the ability to reset the line of scrimmage, meaning whether it's in a pass set or more specifically in a rundown, like you will see him be able to get under the pads, get them into the backfield, and reset that line of scrimmage, which causes a little bit of chaos for the running back. We're going to get to the run defense in a moment. It's not good, but he does show some of that ability to get up under the pads, reset the line of scrimmage. It's there. Now, the big piece is getting it to do it consistently, but it's there. It's in there somewhere. You just got to find a way to get it out a little bit more. He can split blocks when offensive linemen don't get to their spots in time. So these are kind of like those stretch plays or whatever, where you're supposed to all be in unison. And sometimes you get that little crease there, and he will shoot that crease and penetrate and get into the backfield. That's where, he can do a really nice job of that quick first step, that lateral agility. They're trying to get over. He takes that step and then shoots it, and he's right in between the two offensive linemen, and he causes a very disruptive play from it. He has a successful arm over move. He has a quick lateral step, swipe the hands flat and get to the quarterback. We talked about that. He had this awesome, unbelievable anchor play against Washington. He's getting blocked, and it's clear that he's about to give up ground, and then goes down, gets low, almost like hulks up, and then stops the momentum entirely, gets off the block, and makes the play. Just a gorgeous play. I thought he really did a great job of coming into his own more in the second half of the season. I thought we saw a difference. In fact, just to give it to you in real terms, I was watching the first half of his season, and I was so unbelievably underwhelmed that I honestly didn't know that he was going to be an upgrade or being able to get legitimate snaps in Green Bay. Let me clarify that. Like, I would have put Wyatt over him. I would have put Clark over him. And even like from a pass rusher early in the season, I think I would have been almost fine with like Carl Brooks getting snaps over him at times too. And then the second half came, and I thought he played much, much better. And like I thought was playing some of the best football of his career. So that was a positive sign. But it's another one of those conversations of how much stock do you want to put into a guy who turned it on in the second half of a season of a contract year? It's a fair question. But he was like that Washington game, I thought was his best game. And he put some really fun stuff on tape. That was the week 12 tape against Washington. Showed off a push-pull move, was very successful in twists and stunts, fits perfectly in a 4-3 defense. And as mentioned, had the 60 pressures this past year, fifth most of any interior defensive tackle, behind only Chris Jones, Zach Allen, Jalen Carter, and Kobe Turner. Pretty damn group to be in the conversation. Damn good group to be in the conversation with, right? Fifth most pressures by a defensive tackle. So you love to see that. And by the way, just spoiler alert as well, that's why he's getting the big contract. Pressure is king. Pressure is king. And, it's not going to be a great experience against the run. At least it hasn't been. Maybe the next team can unlock him, but the pressure is there. 60 pressures is a big deal when it comes to the defensive tackles. So that's a huge number for him. The negatives for Osa: holding up at the point of attack and run defense. Double teams were a non-starter. He just couldn't hold up against them. That to me was the real big issue. The run defense, holding up at the point of attack, on the ground far too often, getting knocked over. He got thrown out of the club. He got caught leaning and off balance. A lot of wins against bad offensive linemen. That's going to, or in bad offensive lines too, that's going to sound maybe like a more egregious negative than it is. That's what you're supposed to do. Win against the bad offensive linemen. It's not going to be easy against the good ones. So win against the ones that maybe aren't as good, when you can. And he did that. That's what I saw on tape. Didn't do much against the better O-lines in Philly and Detroit. So again, he made his hay against maybe some of the not great offensive lines. And then when he faced the good ones, it was a little bit tougher sledding for him. And then last but not least, closing and finishing plays. He had those 60 pressures, right? From a box score standpoint, only 4.5 sacks. Now, PFF credits him with 7. It's a little bit different there, but still 60 pressures. You'd like to see him get a bit more than 4.5 in the box score, at least per the NFL. So finishing those plays, getting the quarterback to the ground, I think that would up his value even more. But the ability's there. He's just got to close down some of those plays and actually get the sack, get to the quarterback. All right, let's go to Levi Onwuzurike. The positives: really good blend of size, quickness, and strength. He rarely has a pure loss, meaning thrown to the ground or pancaked or just completely stymied. He just continues to work, and you rarely see him just not have a play where he can't get off the block in some capacity. He's at least in the, if he doesn't win the rep, he's at least battling through the entirety of it, which you love to see. Stays active, rallies to the football, smart player, recognizes plays, maintains his assignment. He has also a first step and swipe move, which is very successful for him. Solid, quick first step. Also played some defensive end. Remember, Detroit had a lot of injury issues at defensive end. So Onwuzurike actually moved to the outside, got some rushes as a pass rusher on the outside. They even stood him up as a basically stand-up outside linebacker on a play. So some very, very cool stuff that they did with him, and just kind of shows his talent and his versatility. Definitely looks the part. Again, quick, strong hands, and was 16th in pressures for interior defensive linemen. So maybe not the top 5 or whatever, but 16th is really, really darn good still for an interior defensive lineman. And again, his 47 pressures, that's nothing to sneeze at. That's more than any other interior player in Green Bay would have had last year, or did have last year. So that's a really good number for Onwuzurike. The negatives, he's not a pure disruptor. Sometimes it's more of a slow burn type of guy. Always kind of leaves you wanting a little bit more. You look at him, you see him, you look at all the talent, and you're just like, why are you not dominating this league? He looks the part like he should. You just always are left wanting a little bit more. PFF, as mentioned, actually had a higher grade on Levi. That was a very interesting aspect of this, but there were some obviously deficiencies there when it came to some of the tackling and things like that. He gets too high, needs to keep better pad level. Definitely got out leveraged at times. Missed all of 2022 with a back injury. And in his 3 years per the NFL and their statistics, has only 3.5 sacks in 3 years. You want to know the difference why one guy might get 20 million and one guy might be in more of that 7-8 million per year range? That's it. Odighizuwa 5th in pressures of all interior defensive linemen. And for Onwuzurike, 3.5 sacks in 3 years. That's a big issue. You need to have a little bit better numbers than that if you want that big payday. And Onwuzurike has not been able to do that. My total verdict here is, I will say it one more time, I cannot believe the difference in potential contract value between the two. And I'm like, literally, I don't believe it. I think it's going to be closer. But if it is that, it is a stunner to me. As I mentioned, actually liked Levi Onwuzurike's overall game a little bit more, but the pressures clearly go to Osa. PFF also had the higher grade on Levi Onwuzurike. As I mentioned, pressures are king, which is going to get Osa that big deal. Here's how I would kind of define these two and where they kind of fit in the scheme of things. If I were a GM, and a lot of teams can be very thankful that I'm not, and fans more importantly too. But if I were a GM and I was going to go at Osa Odighizuwa, I would be going more aggressively towards Milton Williams. I thought Milton Williams was a similar non-run defensive tackle, but was more explosive as a pass rusher. So if given the choice between Osa Odighizuwa and Milton Williams, I'm just going all in on Milton Williams. If I'm going to pursue them, I'm going to make sure I get Milton Williams out of it. And then if it's Onwuzurike and he's actually going for far less money, that I'm just going to go with that over Odighizuwa as well, because I'm getting pennies on the dollar, at that point. To go from 60 pressures to 47, but save, 70 some million along the way. Yeah, I'll go with Onwuzurike in that situation. And I think he's a really good player. I think he'd fit really well in Green Bay. 4-3 defensive tackle. Probably, maybe a little bit too similar to Devontae Wyatt. I don't necessarily see them going in that direction, but he would be a really good value add to this team if it's anywhere near that 7, 8, 9 million per year for him for a couple of years. Like I said, sign me the hell up on that. That's where I'm at. If it's I'm going big game hunting for the pass rusher on the interior, I want Milton instead of either of these guys. If I'm looking for value based on what the contract projections are from Spotrac and from PFF, I'm definitely leaning more towards Onwuzurike at that point. That's where I'm at. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. No real much, more to go over for either of the players. I liked both of them. Let me just kind of wrap it that way. I liked both of these players. They would both fit in Green Bay very well. They both make the pass rush better. They both make the entirety of the defensive line better. The contract for Osa is just far too much for what I would pay, at least, and especially in comparison. But yeah, both of them really talented players. And if Green Bay ended up with either, they'd be lucky to get either, quite frankly. The pricing, dependent upon that a little bit, but I liked both. I think there's a better chance in Onwuzurike than Osa Odighizuwa. And I'll say it one more time. If given the choice, I would go towards Milton Williams a little bit more than probably either of these guys. That's going to do it again for me today. Thank you so much for joining me. Always appreciate you guys a ton. Make sure to like, subscribe, comment, give those 5-star reviews. Be right back here tomorrow with an all new episode. Shout out to our All Pro and Hall of Fame members: Most Hated Minnesotan, PJ Wynn, John Wild, Brandon Paletta, Jennifer Wright, Boom Handle, Donald Lee, Lori Lord, Baby QB, David McCluskey, Donald Decker, Alex Swanger, Naldo Espinoza, Peter Rataka, Jay Zimmerman, B Brown, Puerto Rican Packer, Dan Gesford, Step Key, Dylan Pat Scott, Bobby Santoro, SoCal Pack, Chris Rager, Izzy Roberts, Ian Ewing, and Razul Douglas time. See you guys soon. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.